Welcome, 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 my lovely brothers and sisters. Welcome to a new live broadcast today. We are going to do part 3 about cosmic narcissism, and the main title is Inside an Archangel's Mind. So let us start. I go a little bit back here. I start with narcissism is literally a mind virus. And those who have this virus can never be cured. They were contaminated in the childhood, and these people contaminate everybody they get in contact with. But those who get contaminated with the virus in their adulthood can be cured, although it takes a lot of effort. And native Indians knew about all this very well, and they also thought of it as a mind virus or a sickness of the spirit, and they called it wetiko. So, as the reader may have realized, there are eerie similarities between a full-fledged narcissist and a full-fledged codependent. They both know and have a false self, and the true self is hidden underneath, almost completely suppressed. Does this mean that the codependent now also has become a narcissist? Yes, in clinical terms, he or she has, but there is a difference. Remember, we discussed how the true self of a narcissist is either an infant or a little child who never developed. Therefore, there is no cure for full-blown narcissism. All that is left, if therapy would hypothetically be successful, is a child that is completely undeveloped and cannot function in society or by themselves. However, a codependent who adopts the shared fantasy usually still has an adult mind hidden behind the fantasy. The victim may not be able to fully regain who she was before the abuse for several reasons. And the most important being that the victim is not the same person she was, let's say, years ago before the abusive relationship started. Time changes people with or without abuse. The victim lost those 15 years of personality development, and the first step toward recovery is to realize and accept this. However, there is a good chance the person can heal if she is persistent, patient, and brave. As mentioned, a false self cannot find supply within itself. So the same thing goes for a codependent's false self. The shared fantasy, usually the victim has not adopted the shared fantasy 100%. So there is a part of her that is still genuine, and some energy supply can be taken from there as it should. However, it is usually not enough. So even the codependent starts feeding soul energy from others in her or his environment to gain enough energy to sustain himself or herself. Therefore, we see this very often in society. This explains also why a lot of people are complaining nowadays, feeling so drained. So the more the codependent heals, the more she becomes her true self again, and will feed less and less from the environment, and therefore stops being toxic to others. She can now sustain herself, and confidence and security are slowly building back up in the codependent's mind. She gets her life together and becomes self sufficient and independent. More so, the more she heals. Healing often includes creating a completely new personality in many ways, as well as regaining some of the person within that he or she once was. That is not a bad thing because the person, the codependent, is building anew, is based on current values, morals, ethics, likings, passions, and dreams, rather than those she might have had 15 years ago when she was less mature. Thus, healing is very possible. Um, I now go into chapter 10 of this book, The Orion Book, which is written, as you can see, by Wes Penry. I highly recommend you to buy this book yourself, start reading it, and start educating yourself um, about the background of all the things that are happening in this world. Lovely brothers and sisters, we have, better said, the majority of human beings have become themselves more and more narcissistic too. Why? Because the there are many human beings whom are unawares of the fact that they have been completely sucked into the mindset of a fallen archangel, whom we know as Lucifer and is in actuality known as Uriel, but also known as En.Ki or En.Ki. We need to educate ourselves. The fake world that we live in shall never educate educate us in such a way that we can free ourselves from this false construct known as the patriarchal matrix. So we need to do the work ourselves, and we need to educate and inform ourselves. And this book can help you tremendously with it. And educating yourself is also part of your healing process. Because the more you get the deeper understanding of what narcissism is, the more you get to the understanding of what cosmic narcissism is. And the cosmic narcissistic shared fantasy that many humans are participating in unawares. So we need to wake the heck up because, lovely brothers and sisters, we as human soul group, we are completely destroying our home planet. And the trail of destruction becomes more and more with the day. So we need to turn the tables. But how can we turn the tables? By educating and informing ourselves and learning everything we can learn about narcissism, and go through as many sources as possible, because each and every source has its own experiences and testimonies with several levels of narcissism. All right, chapter 10, Inside an Archangel's Mind. They gave us their mind. Do you hear me? The predators gave us their mind, which becomes our mind. The predator's mind is baroque, contradictory, morose, filled with the fear of being discovered any minute. I know that even though you have never suffered hunger, you have food anxiety, which is none other than the anxiety of the predator who fears that any moment now its maneuver is going to be uncovered and food is going to be denied. Through the mind, which after all is their mind, the predators inject into the lives of human beings whatever is convenient for them, and they ensure in this manner a degree of security to act as a buffer against their fear. Lovely brothers and sisters, this is a piece written from a book coming from Carlos Castaneda titled Active Side of Infinity. Lovely brothers and sisters, this is one of the main reasons why they are chemtrailing us so much, because their levels of fear is growing. Why? Because there are more and more people start seeing through the lies and are really questioning this world and are really questioning where the root is laid of all this pain and suffering that we as human soul group are going through. There are more and more people coming to the awareness about what narcissism is. There are more and more people, thankfully, coming to the awareness that they themselves need to do the healing work, and that there is no one else that can save us, only ourselves. So they are more and more in a hurry to enforce their technologies, their artificial intelligences upon us, and thus their singularity. This singularity, my lovely brothers and sisters, is not in our best interest at all. Behind this singularity is a very dark scheme planned, and it all has to do with the total destruction of the Orion universe and the creatrix who has created the human soul group known as Sophia. And if you are participating in the singularity, you need to be aware of the consequences that will have for you. So I would highly recommend you to read more about this, and I will also share a link in the description box that leads you to an article and in actuality to the website where you can find a free to download PDF that is all about singularity, and it gives a good background of what it truly is and the dark agenda behind it. All right, I continue. Even when we have left, better said, even when we have let go of our personal narcissists and are on the mend, 99.9% of us are still codependent to a God, whether or not we are religious. Yahweh, or Yod-He-Vav-He, the God of the Torah. We know that in the Christian religion we are taught to fear God, which is interesting. Why would we fear our Creator? Is he then so dangerous? Why does he have a so-called chosen people? Aren't believers who are dedicated to God supposed to go to paradise one day? But whose paradise is this in actuality? Apparently, we must fear God in our earthly existence to get to paradise. And there, everything will be total bliss. Upon that, we need to worship Him and praise Him because apparently He needs attention and admiration in large quantities. And He is a self-proclaimed jealous God, which means there must be gods other than Him, or He couldn't be jealous. Moreover, religious people who worship the jealous God forget one crucial thing. God is jealous of us. Why is God supposedly superior to us, jealous of his own creation? So these are questions that should be questioned and asked. And I am on a journey, and I went the last 20 years through many movements, through many rivers in healing myself. Recently, I came to the understanding that there is a part in me, then that is in actuality the wounded part in me that still is searching for something to cling onto. Thankfully, there is also a part in me that says, no, you need to grow up and you need to do the work yourself. So I have worked myself through the Bible several times, and there are some good things in that book, but don't stay stuck onto it. Just take the things out of it that you can use for your healing and understanding of this world. And I started myself also questioning things because I also found it quite weird that there is a so-called being that calls itself God and is jealous of its own creation. That doesn't make any sense. So I'm learning, and yeah, I'm also going through each and every one that is on a true path of healing and understanding itself and the world it lives in. Everyone is also walking a path that you eventually find out was maybe not such a good path to walk, although I also know that every path you walk during your process of healing and understanding yourself and life and the so-called world you're living in, we need to sometimes walk paths and pathways to collect some pieces of information. So I continue. Indeed, the worshippers of the God of the Old Testament of the Bible have many reasons to fear him. Let's take a few examples and start with the story of Abraham and Isaac. God told Abraham to sacrifice his beloved son to show his dedication to this cruel God. With a heavy heart, the father was just about to behead his son on an altar of worship when God intervened and said he could spare his son because Abraham had now showed that he praised the true God and worshipped him. So another example is the Battle of Jericho, when God ordered Joshua to invade Jericho and kill everybody inside, including women and children. Why? Because God said they were all evil. Oh, really? And why must an almighty God order humans of flesh and blood kill for him? If this cruel God must punish some of his creation, why doesn't he do it by himself? Third example is just in general. Why is God turning men against men? A big part of the Old Testament is about wars between different peoples, and God continuously interferes with human affairs to divide and conquer. So obviously, he is also a very bloodthirsty God. He likes blood, pain, suffering, and death, and worship. God needs worship, and he needs sacrifice. He needs lush, and he needs blood. Same thing. We know that life is in the blood. So now you get an understanding why God wants blood. Because this God himself cannot produce life in itself anymore. Better said, it is getting empty of life force. So that is why he needs us humans as his battery, so he, this God, can stay alive. So now we get to understand why all these sacrifices needed to be done. And all these sacrifices are still being done because a huge amount of humans are still not awakened and are still in a deep comatose sleep. Unfortunately, when it comes to Lush soul energy, it doesn't even matter if people love or hate him. He feeds from both. Since ancient times, there have been houses of reverence around the world where people can worship God. It doesn't matter whom you say God is, because ultimately all, between quotation marks, gods worshipped on this planet are ultimately one and the same, disguised under numerous names. So, Archangel Uriel, he takes all the louche, even if you are a Wiccan. For example, Wiccans worship Pan, who is En.Ki. It's worth pointing out that these houses, so-called houses of so-called gods, often have steeples or towers sticking up from the building. These are simply antennas, and they help directing the soul energy emanating from the worshippers inside the building, sucked up by, between quotation marks, God himself in the unseen realm. Some might say Yahweh or Yehovah or Yod-He, Vav-He only required that people sacrificed lambs, not humans, which is of course not true. Just take the Jericho example again. I would suggest we ponder upon this. If we jump ahead to the New Testament, Yeshua/Jesus is known as the Lion of Judah, and we are his lamb. Another good question also is, my lovely brothers and sisters, why are we called sheep? That is a good question to ponder upon too. Why are we humans called sheep? That's ridiculous. We are human beings. We are far more than angels are, because we have been gifted with spirit. Are we not Is it then such a stretch to think that the lambs people sacrificed to the Old Testament God in ancient times is just a metaphor for humans? Then, if we look at many other cultures, it's not different to go back to the Incas and the Mayas and the Aztecs and so on. They also worshipped a god who needed blood sacrifices, human sacrifices. We do not need to be geniuses to connect the dots here. So it must be noted that human sacrifice is just as much an issue in today's world as it was in yester times. It is still done among tribes in different parts of the world and in the first and second world countries. It is done inside so-called satanic cults and among the elites, better known elites, and their so-called secret societies. So why does this, between quotation marks, Almighty God need so much blood? Again, life is in the blood. Well, we have covered that already. The soul is in the bloodstream, in the cells, and God Almighty needs a lot of soul energy because he cannot retrieve it from anywhere else. He is stripped of his creative abilities. He is disconnected from the universal elements. He has a soul which is fire, but he cannot fill up his reservoir on his own. He needs others so he can suck in more energy, or he will destruct. So he takes it from us. And now, my lovely brothers and sisters, you start to understand why it is of such a great importance that we know why the things are happening as they are happening in this world, and whom is truly pulling the strings in this world. And that is why I am presenting you this information. And again, please buy this book, The Orion Book, written by Wes Penry. Yourself start reading and educating yourself. The more people start doing this, educating themselves, the weaker this system becomes, and the weaker these gods become, the lesser batteries they have to feed themselves from. God across many religions has the same traits and personality flaws, while he expects for us to be perfect or act in certain ways because we are his extensions. On one level, we need to become what he could never be, so he can be perfect through us. So now we get the understanding behind "Be ye perfect as I am," what God is saying to us. In actuality, we start to flip this sentence. If we flip this sentence, then it is in actuality stated, I need to become as perfect as I can be through you, human soul group. That is in actuality that is being said with that sentence. Be ye perfect as I am. But it is also an oxymoron because, on the other hand, he needs to control us and keep us suppressed, so we do not exceed him and threaten his godhood. Moreover, if we are not perfect in comparison to his introject, he, this so-called God, better known as this fallen Archangel Uriel, whom we better know as Lucifer, is not perfect because in his mind we are him. Because in his mind we human beings are him. So if we go back to this sentence, be ye perfect as I am, what does this sentence also say? Become as narcissistic as this fallen archangel himself is. Become as narcissistic, sociopathic, and psychopathic as this fallen archangel, Uriel/Lucifer himself is. That is also what this sentence is saying. Make the connectional dots. Please do so. And I'm just passing this information on to you because I care about my lovely brothers and sisters. I care about the human soul group, and it hurts my heart to see that still so many of my lovely brothers and sisters are still in a deep sleep and in a state of avoidance and denial. All right. So if we are not perfect in comparison to his introject, he, this so-called God, is not perfect because in his mind we are him. Either way, I would say he doesn't set a very good example for how a human should be, morally or ethically. God is also prone to favoritism. He glorifies certain human tribes and condemns others. But it is also stated, and that is the hypocrisy that you can read if you read the Bible really, you can also see that on the other hand, God says, I do not do favoritism. I do not favor persons. So here is the constant confusion. So if you are reading the Bible very well, then you can see the signature of confusion all the time. By doing so, does he not show he is indeed a very imperfect God? After all, he has supposedly created all humans. Why did he create flawed humans then? God is treating groups of people, entire tribes as his golden children, while he uses others as his scapegoats. We have now mainly portrayed Jehovah or Yahweh or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in the Old Testament and looked at his personality traits and his actions. It is not pretty. Again, it is no wonder that his followers fear him. Because, lovely brothers and sisters, if a person is in a narcissistic relation, if a person is in a narcissistic relationship, what happens during the progression of the relationship, the partner, better known as the supply, starts to become afraid for the narcissist. So now you get the understanding why you need to educate yourself about narcissism. To see all this. So now you start to understand that the God of the Old Testament is a narcissist, psychopath, and sociopath. Because he's also doing push and pull. One time he loves his children, and the other time he kills them, punishes them, and expects all sorts of things from them which they cannot fulfill. So we are dealing with cosmic narcissism. When the reader has read the chapter up to this point, does God's traits remind you of something we discussed in chapter 9? Let's pretend God went to a therapist. What do you think he would be diagnosed with? Well, I am not a psychologist, but I have studied the basics for a few years. When it comes to personality traits and personality disorders, and in the case of the Old Testament God, it is not rocket science at all to see that this God would most likely be diagnosed with psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellism. To begin with, one could almost say he is the archetype for personality disorders. You can say the founder of personality disorders. For those who do not know what Machiavellism is, here is the definition. Machiavellans, Machiavellians are sly, deceptive, distrusting, and manipulative. They are characterized by cynical and misanthropic beliefs, closeness, and a striving for money, power, and status, and the use of cunning influence tactics. So this is the God of the Old Testament whom people worship and believe is the most divine there is. As we can see, God is clinically insane according to psychology. And although he has at least the three personality disorders above, we can safely also call him an overt narcissist. He is overtly abusive and overpowering in his evil. And he is also a psychopath because he is a killer and a serial killer. And he commits genocide up to this day. The great majority of all wars throughout history have been religious wars, and both sides in a war have God on their side, interestingly enough. So let us see the God of the New Testament. If the reader is only vaguely familiar with the Bible, you might still have noticed that the God of the Old Testament is a mentally ill being who also seems to be schizophrenic. The reason is that Yahweh or Jehovah or Yahweh Vathe is a composite of beings generally attributed to the one and the same fallen archangel Uriel and fallen archangel Metatron. Between brackets En.Ki and Marduk, where Uriel is the less evil of the two, although it sometimes interweaves. Jehovah or Yahweh is just a title, not the name of God. The original Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, long before humankind was created, was a title held by the Queen of Orion, the mother of the stars. And because it is just a title, it was hijacked by the fallen archangels who rebelled. In the matrix, Uriel and sometimes Metatron is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. They interchange. Thus, the God presented on earth in most cultures today is male. He is not God, but an fallen archangel. It is also interesting to notice that God in the New Testament is absent. Instead, we are presented with his, between quotation marks, son, or better said, son, S-U-N, comma, Jesus of Nazareth. We are going to talk more about this person later. When God is mentioned, he is a more loving and compassionate God than in the Old Testament. It's almost like two different gods. In fact, I am convinced, says Wes Penry, that the God of the Old Testament and the New Testament are in actuality one and the same, if we exclude Marduk from the equation for a moment. He is just presented in a different way, much because of Jesus, between quotation marks, teachings, which were in actuality not his own teachings, by the way, but that will be later discussed. The New Testament has a new approach to the concept of God, ascension, and the so-called future kingdom. But whose kingdom? When his son will come back and rule for 1,000 years. In this scenario, God needs to be more passionate. And moreover, he is not himself present on earth anymore. He resides in his loftiness, in a godly dimension somewhere, and is unreachable. In the Old Testament, he was very much present, unfortunately, and in Genesis, he were even invited to Abraham's abode, and Abraham's family ate dinner with God. In the New Testament, he is very abstract, while Jesus is very concrete. We learn we must go through Jesus to get to God. From having researched Jesus, between brackets, Yeshua's teachings from different angles, I do believe there is truth in it, but not as it is portrayed in the New Testament. As usual, it has been distorted and inverted. Only some of the story is told, and even that has been compromised, as is usually the case in this construct, in this matrix. To get a deeper insight into what the New Testament is about, we need to go into the Gnostic teachings and other old teachings, and the rejected gospel that, for, between quotation marks, good reasons, viewed from the controller's perspective, were excluded from the Bible. However, ironically enough, even the Gnostic Gospels are compromised. The following quote is very relevant to En.Ki's / Uriel's matrix, or Lucifer's matrix. Just look at us. Everything is backwards. Everything is upside down. Doctors destroy health. Lawyers destroy justice. Psychiatrists destroy minds. Scientists destroy truth. Media destroys information. Religions destroy spirituality. Governments destroy freedom. This comes from Michael Effner. So again, just look at us. Everything is backwards. Everything is upside down. Doctors destroy health. Lawyers destroy the justice. Psychiatrists destroy minds. Scientists destroy truth. Media destroys information. Religions destroy spirituality. And governments destroy freedom. Again, a piece of text from Michael Effner. Yes, everything is inverted. We can almost always count on it. Reverse it. and you will get it right. It is cleverly done. Teach us constantly the opposite from the truth, and the truth will seem ridiculous and crazy. I will not go into Gnosticism to any great extent in this book because that's a vast subject all by itself. But I have read many, but not all of the Nag Hammadi texts. And although there are lots of truths in them, they still point in an erroneous direction toward the male god, because the matrix is based on the patriarchal system. And thus we have a male god, a male being who's also a fallen archangel. Fallen Archangel Uriel, also known as En.Ki, the Elite, better known as elite, and their minions can teach us a lot of truths if they wish, and the truth will attract followers. Then all they need to do is to invert the important parts. So the God of the universe is still Uriel, and the followers give their power to him. In the New Testament, God is no longer an overt narcissist like in the Old Testament. Now he has become a covert narcissist, which means he is so-called shy and hides, but is still grandiose and controlling. Instead of openly and hands-on with assistance from his helpers, human elites or elites, such as Joshua, interfere with human affairs in the most destructive ways, he is, in the New Testament, still manipulating humankind from the back seat, using his, between quotation marks, son to do the job. In that sense, God's so-called son is Marduk, and looking at things from this perspective, there were at least two Jesuses, Marduk and the real Jesus, whom we will address later. Everybody who believes in God, whether it is the Christian God or any other God, takes on En.Ki's or En.Ki's narcissistic personality and becomes narcissistic in the sense that they inhabit the God's narcissistic mindset and become like him, piously judgmental. This and much more will be evident as we move along. And with this said, I have come to the end of this third part, all about cosmic narcissism. The next time I will go through God and humans, a comparison in narcissism, and the other chapter titled Missing the Cosmic Mother, because that is our deepest wound, lovely brothers and sisters. We are still searching for our cosmic mother. We miss our cosmic mother, so to speak, and we are in a constant search for this. And then eventually we think then, okay, if there's nothing else, we stay stuck onto this patriarchal God. But in actuality, each and every human soul in the human soul group misses the cosmic mother, and the cosmic mother is Sophia. So but this all about the next time, That will be the fourth part, and then the fifth part shall start with the creation of cosmic arc narcissist. That's quite a long part, so that's why I do it in parts. And again, I would highly recommend you to read this book yourself. Lovely brothers and sisters, we need to come to this deep awareness that we are destroying our home in a rapid pace. And this terraforming that is being done on this earth is not in our best interest at all. We need to wake up from this comatose sleep that many of us are still in. We need to step out of this denial. We need to step out of this state of denial and avoidance. We need to acknowledge that this world is being reigned by a fallen archangel who sees himself as God the Father, which he is not. He did not create the human soul group. He did not. He was an assistant to it, but he did not create the basic fundament of the human soul group. The creatrix created the human soul group, and the creatrix is known as Sophia, the divine feminine, the queen of the stars. All right. I want to thank you for tapping into this. Thank you for tapping into the channels, Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble. I want to close off by saying I wish you all a beautiful, joyful day, and let all this information sink into your mind, into your heart, and into your soul. And start reading this book, the Orion book, yourself too, which is written by Wes Penry. I close off with a nice piece of music created by Ben Sound, and let us say inspiration. All right. I see you next time, and thank you for listening and tuning in into this information, and see you next time with a new part about cosmic narcissism.